And we're here with Siim Land, author, speaker, content creator, and returning guest to the Optimal Performance Podcast. Siim, welcome back.
Hey Sean, I'm glad to be back here and excited to talk with you again.
Yeah. So I want to start the way that I like to start with people who are involved in nutrition and performance, especially. So maybe you knew this was coming. What time is it where you are, and what have you put into your body?
Yeah, well, last time we talked, I think I said like nothing besides coffee or something. But this time it's also like in the evening, it's 7 p.m. here, and so far I've consumed, like I still had some coffee at noon, but in the coffee I mixed some glycine and trimethylglycine as well, which is a really good kind of a natural sweetener as well as a good methyl donor, and generally a very kind of anti-inflammatory amino acid that doesn't actually have like a insulinogenic spike. It actually lowers your blood sugar. So I mixed that with some coffee a little bit, and then I also had like a protein shake during my workout like an hour ago. And the main kind of idea is that I'll be working out fasted, but just because I'm having this small protein shake, I'm also able to mitigate the catabolic or the muscle catabolism that occurs during a workout, especially if you're doing it fasted. So I'm still able to maintain the semi-fasted state while being able to perform at the workout and also promote muscle growth with it. So like it's sort of a hack that I call. It's called like targeted intermittent fasting. So basically fasting all throughout the day and leveraging the benefits of autophagy and whatnot. And when you are working out, you're getting this protein shake that essentially helps you to prevent the muscle catabolism and promotes additional muscle growth while still being able to be like in a semi-fast state. So that's kind of my go-to secret for doing one meal a day and still being able to build the muscle with it.
Wow. So I want to get this straight. So you fasted all day, a little coffee with those additions, and then at 6 o'clock at night, you decide to work out fasted. But like while you're working out, you're consuming the protein shake for this targeted metabolic fasting.
Yeah. That's basically what I do, and it's yeah like a good combination for one meal a day. So and especially for people who want to build strength as well as muscle mass. So it's always, let's say, eating more frequently would be beneficial for muscle growth, but it's kind of a hassle. So I would much rather do it with a easier way where I'm still able to eat once a day and still able to build muscle with it. So it's kind of a little shortcut or a little biohack.
So we got to know what's in the protein shake. I imagine that there's 1,000 things in it.
No, not really. Like it's a regular whey protein. It tends to be with all the essential amino acids, as well as kind of stimulates the anabolic switches like mTOR and IGF-1 as well. So that's why I tend to use it.
So then that's your OMAD is a protein shake while you're working out, and then you won't eat for the rest of the day again?
No, like I'll probably have like a meal, an actual post-workout meal after this podcast. So I'm still eating. So if I were to be having only the protein shake, then that would be like too little calories, and that would like, unless I would want to maybe like lose weight or something, then that would be an option. But currently I'm in this semi like lean gains phase where I'm just gradually progressing in the workouts and gradually trying to build muscle while still maintaining leanness and burning some body fat as well.
Yeah. Well, it's working because I see your posts, bro. I see your posts, and you are leaning out nicely. And well, I got to know what's for dinner then. So you've had the protein shake during your workout that's targeted. You're gonna have a bunch of like cake and ice cream and stuff. Like,
yeah, I wish. Yeah.
what? Like,
But
what's for dinner?
well, tonight I'm having like some salmon and next to the salmon, I'll have maybe like a few eggs and some salad, some vegetables. So I'm still eating like a semi-ketogenic diet, uh, but I do also have like on some days, for example, a few days ago, I had some actually I had some beef kidneys and with some beetroot, some carrots, and some fruit. So that was like a more low fat, higher carb day as opposed to like a low carb, higher fat day. So I do cycle between them and kind of maintain this sort of a metabolic flexibility.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So when you do that, when you lump together, like, are you following like a really strict schedule? Do you have carby days where you have fruit and tubers, or is it every other day, or do you just sort of listen to your body?
Yeah, I usually tend to listen to my body and also like what's more available. So like what's for leftovers, or yeah, like what's kind of what did I have recently and what did I haven't. But I usually try to like at a minimum I would aim for like a once a week where I would have like this higher carb day, and the rest of the days I tend to gravitate more towards. I still like the low carb keto because it's more satiating, it's very convenient, suppresses appetite, and yeah, like the mental power as well as the cognition is also slightly better in my opinion. So I do tend to gravitate more towards like just eating steak and eggs and vegetables, but I do every once in a while like some fruit, some berries, and tubers and those sort of things.
Yeah, I find that, so I follow a pretty similar approach. Fasting until 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I work out before I break my fast, and I don't know if you know. Have you heard of the X3 bar? You familiar with that?
Yeah, yeah, I have it. I have it. It's awesome.
Woohoo, man! So that's all I do. I don't really do any other sort of workout, and my body has 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 shifted, and my physique has improved immensely.
Mm.
Um, and I want to get your take on. I don't know if you've seen the product that Dr. Jaquish has released, which is called Fortigen, which is an amino acid profile that you take at night. Fortagen, Fortigen, and the 2 scoops that you take is an equivalent of 50 grams of protein, because I try to
Mm.
hit that 1 gram of protein per 1 pound body weight every day,
Hmm.
because I'm trying to build lean muscle as well. But I do from time to time like want a handful of blueberries or some
Right.
strawberries or something, and I find that it works best for me because I do get a little bit foggy after I have fruit and tubers. So I tend to do that much later in the evening, kind of right
Hmm.
before bed. Um, is that a smart plan to, if I'm going to do the carbs, if like today is going to be like a carb day again, not cake,
Hmm.
not cake, a handful of bitter blueberries. Is it smarter to eat that carb, in your opinion, like later in the day, later in the night?
Uh, yeah, I do think so. Like, it's actually, the common sense or the argument most people make is that you're, moving around and you're active during the daytime, so to say that, and that's supposed to be the time where you eat your calories as well as carbs. So you would be like burn them off instead of storing them for fat, which does make sense from like the circadian aspect. And there is some research that shows that you are more insulin sensitive at the morning hours, but at the same time, you have to kind of also counter in or take into account your own subjective situation and your context. So, for example, if you work out in the evening, then you're gonna be the most insulin sensitive after that workout, regardless of the time of when you had the workout. The muscle contractions as well as exercise, it depletes your muscle glycogen, and it also makes you more insulin sensitive by activating the one of the glucose transporters called GLUT4. So even after a workout, even if it's like in the evening and you work out maybe like an hour before eating those carbs, you would be still very insulin sensitive because you worked out, you depleted the muscle glycogen, and your body would just, it doesn't even need additional insulin goes into the cells because a GLUT4 works independent of insulin. So, that's sort of kind of a caveat that people have to keep in mind, especially in research, that you are always most sensible to any kind of nutrients while you're fasting as well as after a workout. So your body would kind of absorb it really efficiently. So it doesn't even matter that you would have those carbs later in the day. And I personally think that if you do have some carbs in the evening, then it's going to be just also better for like relaxation and sleep, because like I said, you may feel like slightly drowsy or tired in a good way, because your body gonna release itself from the stress. And that's another like one of the misconceptions about insulin as well as carbs. Like insulin and carbs are actually very anti-stress, or they're gonna lower cortisol, just because they kind of refill your muscle glycogen as well as liver glycogen, and your kind of physiology or your energy status is very, very much regulated by your liver glycogen. So if your liver glycogen is depleted, then that in a way does promote some ketone body production and put you into ketosis, but at the same time your body can also perceive it as a stressor, especially if you do it like chronically, and if you do it like combined with a bunch of high intensity exercise and caffeine and those things. So just refilling your muscle glycogen as well as liver glycogen with some carbs in the evening is a great strategy for just boosting relaxation, lowering stress, lowering cortisol, and kind of getting you out of this fight or flight response that some people may find themselves in, and actually putting yourself to sleep. So I do notice that on some days, if I do have some carbs, then I'll just sleep pretty good, and kind of lowers all of this kind of build-up of tension that may accumulate if you're just like chronically in this ketotic state.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it takes a lot of people quite a long time to get into that, whether they're measuring their ketones or not. It takes people a while to get into that state where they're not hungry or hangry or agitated from ketosis. And for those people who have still not tried it, who have still not experimented with intermittent fasting and a more ketogenic sort of approach to your diet, kicking the sugar and kicking the carbs is really hard, especially for the first like week or two. And for some people, it's super. I mean, like, you're agitated, you're foggy, you're not sleeping well. I know that you are a resource for so many people. Since you appeared on the podcast in episode 191, and a lot's changed. Like you've written a book, you're writing a second book, you've done a lot of presentations, and you're a resource for so many people. Like, what would you tell people who are interested in beginning, sort of intermittent fasting and in a more ketogenic way of eating? What would you tell them things that they should look out for or pay attention to?
Yeah, you did allude to it a little bit, in a way that if the person hasn't tried it before and they have like no like experience with it, then they tend to experience some of the negative side effects, like tiredness, hangriness, lethargy, and sugar craving, and those things. Those are all kind of the signs that your body is like metabolically inflexible, like it's stuck in the sugar burning mode, and it has to be constantly eating like high carb foods as well as having frequent snacks in order to keep its own blood sugar in balance, so to say. So whenever you do experience a drop in blood sugar, then you're gonna get hungry and you're gonna try to raise it back up with like a bagel or a donut or something. So that's like just inflexibility in your metabolism, because naturally humans should be able to just start burning their own body fat with ease and tap into its own body fat stores and burn that for energy, because we all carry like thousands and thousands of calories with us all the time. So it doesn't really make sense, both from a physiological perspective as well as from a like evolutionary perspective. So hunter-gatherers, they don't have access to the fridge and they don't have like these sort of protein bars with them or some juice. They constantly have to have a larger meal and go through the entire day basically with minimal, like close to minimal to eating anything at all. They're basically like doing intermittent fasting as well as eating like some form of a ketogenic diet. And the way they're gonna get away with it is by just tapping into their own body fat stores and burning that for energy. And the way you build this sort of flexibility is to kind of first go through a period where you do go on like a low carb keto diet, and you do intermittent fasting as a way to kind of teach your body to start burning its own body fat stores again, because like the modern society has conditioned our bodies just to lose this ability, and in order to regain it, you have to kind of just go through some sort of a period of adaptation. And the way I describe it is like I describe it in the 3 stages of the ketogenic diet. So the first stage is kind of going on a low-carb keto diet in order to build metabolic flexibility and regain this fat adaptation to kind of go in a fat-burning mode. And that usually takes, for most people, that's going to take, for someone who hasn't ever done a keto diet or hasn't never done any form of intermittent fasting, then for them it's going to take maybe like healthy people can get into it almost like within a week. But like more metabolically inflexible people like diabetics or obese people, then for them, then it may take like up to a few weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, 4 weeks, even up to for some people. But you can definitely accelerate it much faster with going on a longer fast and fasting for like 2 to 3 days in a way, because fasting is literally you're just burning fat, and of course you do burn some glucose as well, but your body will make the shift much faster because it's more like a severe energy depletion. And then the second phase is the keto adaptation phase, which is similar, like it's almost parallel to being in ketosis, but they're somewhat different. So being in ketosis is just the metabolic state with elevated ketones in your blood, and that can happen while you're fasting, or that can also happen while you're eating a keto diet that is low carb, and the body just responds by producing ketones. But the keto adaptation itself, just in the way I define it, is just the ability to use fat and ketones as a fuel source. So you don't necessarily have to be in ketosis to be fat adapted. A hunter-gatherer who eats, let's say, they find a beehive, they're going to eat that honey, they're going to kick themselves out of ketosis, they're going to burn some sugar, but maybe like within the next few hours or maybe by the next day, they're back in ketosis because they're somewhat keto adapted. They're the majority of the time, they're still doing like a keto diet in a way that they're still being low carb, but every once in a while they kick themselves out of ketosis, but they're still able to go back into it relatively fast. So that's like the second stage. And the third stage is the metabolic flexibility stage. And this means that your body is also able to burn both ketones as well as carbs for fuel. So, it's a much more, let's say, balanced way of looking at it, as well as more flexible way of looking at it, because, if you go all in with ketosis, then you're ending yourself, you find yourself back in the same spot that you were in the beginning, like you're burning only fat and ketones, and you're losing the ability to burn sugar and carbs, which is like self-defeating in a way, because you're putting yourself into this corner again, that you're kind of inflexible with your metabolism. And whenever you do accidentally get kicked out of ketosis by maybe eating a piece of potato or something like that, or a piece of cake or whatever it is, then you're going to feel awful just because you're losing your fat adaptation to a certain extent and you're experiencing this brain fog. Your body is in some sort of like an energy crisis in the short term. And that's why the metabolic flexibility is supposed to overcome this. You just burn fat whenever you can, and whenever you do eat carbs, then you burn those carbs, you use them for whatever purpose it may be, like maybe refilling your muscle glycogen, but you also go back into burning fat whenever those carbs run out. So you're going on this dual fuel, and your body is supposed to be in this like burns whatever fuel it has access to, and is also able to maintain health as well as performance with it. So that's actually like the ultimate goal for most people, in my opinion. That should be like they don't want to be on a keto diet for the rest of their life. Or they may not need to do it either. So the end goal for most people is just like fat loss, better health, better blood biomarkers, and just mental well-being and freedom from cravings, just abundant energy. All those things you can achieve that with a keto diet, but you can also achieve that by eating carbs every once in a while, and you don't necessarily have to kind of make sacrifices as long as you build enough fat adaptation in your body, and as well as you kind of condition yourself to use carbs in different situations. And the two main ways you build metabolic flexibility is kind of one of them is the cyclical keto diet, which means that you, like the one that I do, basically, I eat keto most of the time, but on some days I eat some carbs. And the second way is the targeted keto diet, which basically means that you eat keto and you consume like a small amount of carbs during your workout. Maybe like similar to the protein shake that I do, but with carbs. And that's essentially going to give you some like quick energy, and you're going to burn that glucose during the workout, and after the workout you're going to dip back into ketosis. So there's no real difference in your metabolic profile. You're still burning those carbs for energy, but you're also going to be able to burn ketones. And yeah, like whichever one suits for you depends on your goals. You're definitely like your level of physical activity, because I wouldn't recommend like a diabetic to do some sort of like a carb up if they can't handle it. And what's the person's goals, and how often, what kind of foods do they actually like to eat? Because I think it's a mistake to kind of, I don't know, villainize all carbs or villainize all sources of food without really appreciating or without understanding the context and without knowing when is the best time to use them, and like how your body is going to respond, because they all work. Like people can survive on any kind of diet, and they can survive on a low fat, high carb diet, and they can survive on a low carb, high fat diet. But the kind of differentiation is like what kind of other factors that they take into account, and what's their overall diet look like.
Yeah, that's an excellent breakdown of it. And I had not really thought of it until you described it. But if you're going to do the targeted metabolic fasting and you want to have some carbs, you want to boost from the carbs so that you can perform your workout better, so that you can be more, have more energy from the glucose.
Usually the carbs are best suited for maybe like some sort of like actual event, like maybe like marathon runners tend to use it, as well as like high intensity exercise, maybe like CrossFit or this very high glycolytic sport where you're using a bunch of glycogen and you can't really fully meet that demand with just ketones and fat.
Right. So for someone who may be, let's just take somebody who's had a fairly normal Western diet and they're maybe 20 or 30 pounds overweight, not obese, but heavy-ish and soft, and they're interested in getting into this and starting into this. I come from the opinion that now is the time. Right now, in this moment in history, is the time to like really start experimenting. You have the time. You're home. You're forcibly at home, and this is maybe a secondary effect, but if you want to save money, you should eat less food. And,
yeah.
I mean, as a father and head of the household, I could really easily triple the amount of food that I consume. I could really eat way more than I do, but I'm actually saving my household money. I'm feeling better and performing at a higher level by eating less food, by doing intermittent fasting, and I've been doing it for a while. But for someone who's, maybe 20 pounds, 30 pounds overweight, and they're just getting into this, based on the process that you described, which is these 3 phases, how long, of course it's different for everybody, but how long do each of those phases typically take if someone's being really diligent and maybe they kick it off with like a 3-day fast and they just go, go for it big time? Typically based on your experience, how long do those 3 phases take?
Yeah, it's gonna vary between people, and maybe for instance, if you were to start off with like a 3-day fast, then you would get into ketosis usually by day 2 on like a high carb diet, and but at the same time, like if you start off from a low carb diet, then the transition process would be faster, and you would get into ketosis also much faster. And at that point, once you are in ketosis, then generally it's still a good idea to eat like an actual low carb keto diet for about 1 to 2 weeks, in my opinion, just to kind of change the body's metabolic pathways and kind of get used to it in a way. You don't want to be in this kind of periphery all the time where you're not fully in ketosis and you're not getting enough carbs from your food either, and you're feeling like this lethargy. Your brain is in a coma because you're not getting the sugar and such. So the kind of the periphery is the bad spot. But ultimately, once you do, let's say once you've been on a low carb keto diet for 2 weeks and then you start to implement some carbs, then maybe like the first 2 to 3 times you do have them, you may feel slightly sluggish the next day, but the kind of end goal is to be in the spot where you don't feel a difference when you do eat carbs. Like at the moment, like for example, in the past, I used to do like a keto diet completely with no carbs for maybe like 2 years straight. And whenever I would have like maybe some carbs, like a piece of potato in a soup or something like that, then I would notice it immediately in a way that my body kind of feels the blood sugar start to rising, and that's like a sign of some inflexibility and like it's this physiological insulin resistance in a way that your body becomes resistant to insulin just because it doesn't need it. And you haven't conditioned your body to use it, so it kind of down regulates the insulin, and it manifests itself as a mild physiological insulin resistance, or a much better term would be like glucose intolerance, or you're just sparing glucose, and you don't you haven't used your like sugar burning engine in a long time. But nowadays, after having done it, back and forth all the time, I don't notice any difference when I do have carbs, because my body just, okay, we have the glucose coming in, we're gonna release the insulin, we're gonna shuttle it away, and I'm also not like overeating carbs in massive amounts, so I'm not even eating more carbs than my body can handle in a given moment. Like I'm also always kind of basing it around my exercise and how much carbs do I burn. So like if I were to be on a rest day, if I haven't moved around anything, then I would maybe like notice a difference from that. But thanks to being like physically active, thanks to doing resistance training, then my body just kind of uses the glucose all the time really efficiently. And it may take some time to reach this point, but generally if you do everything, like if your intention is to achieve this metabolic flexibility off the get-go, then even within a month you can probably be in the state where you're having regular carbohydrate refeeds, as well as being in ketosis and eating a low carb keto diet the other parts of the time.
Okay. I think that helps put it into context a little bit. If you're diligent about it, it can take a month to get into this place where you have achieved that metabolic flexibility, so that your world is not destroyed from a bite of potato. And
yeah, exactly.
I think as far as lifestyle is concerned, I think that's where, like you mentioned earlier, that's where we all want to be. We all want to be lean and strong and clear-minded, and we also want to be able to eat some carbs sometimes without it totally wrecking our day or our week. And from a lifestyle perspective, most of us are not endurance athletes. Most of us are not, fitness competitors. So in that way, we can get the benefits of increasing our metabolic flexibility over this period, this sort of introductory period where we establish better baselines, we establish better, nutritional rhythms and habits. What I've found for myself is that my palate actually changes. And my appetite changes from time to time when I'm being really diligent, when I'm not. And I think that's the same for most people, is like the drive. If people knew that if they went through the process that you're talking about, that takes, the 3 phases, and then after a month, they realize that they don't crave that bagel anymore. They don't think about it. It's not occupying their mind. They're not sitting there thinking, oh my God, I want pizza so bad. All I want to eat is pizza. I can't wait till tonight so I can eat pizza and have 10 beers. Like, it changes. It does actually shift, and it's not as difficult as I think people think it is, because their mind is conditioned that bagels and pizza are the only things that can make them feel good.
Right. Yeah, and that's like another one of the pitfalls that you may fall into on like a very restrictive diet. You know, although I would like, I do think that I'm like this kind of a guy who can just be on a very disciplined, strict diet for the rest of my life with
Yeah.
no cheats or anything. I can do it. I've done it in the past, but at the same time, like I've realized that it's also about just sometimes the more disciplined approach or the more having more self-control can also manifest itself in a way that okay, I'm able to eat only like this one piece of cake or
Right.
this one slice of cake, one slice of donut, one slice of apple without going into this like massive binge that some people may find themselves in. Like if you are, let's say, on a low carb, low sugar keto diet, let's say for a few months, and then you do have like some birthday cake, and then you kind of explode, or like you super compensate for it because you start to crave this. You haven't had like this sugar in a long time, and it's almost like the survival response. Because like if a hunter gatherer also comes across a beehive, they've been coming from the winter, they haven't had carbs for several months, and they have like this beehive,
Yeah.
then they of course they're gonna eat the entire beehive. So like a normal physiological response,
Right.
and you can avoid that. You can avoid this sort of massive yo-yo dieting and binge and fast cycles if you're able to practice moderation. And if you can just, okay, I'm going to eat maybe like this one piece of cake, and I'm going to put it away afterwards. I'm feeling satisfied. I'm not craving additional, and I'm not going to kind of super compensate for it. I'm not going to be stressed out, or I'm not going to get anxious about it.
Yeah.
Because although let's say some foods are healthier than others, like of course a grass-fed steak is in my opinion healthier than a donut. Even if you
That's a
a,
fair.
a single
Yeah.
a,
Fair.
a single bite of a donut or a single donut or a single piece of cake isn't gonna destroy your world, or it's not gonna give you diabetes instantly,
Right.
as long as you're not overeating and as long as you're practicing still some moderation and kind of having some form of self-control. And
Right.
this metabolic flexibility can just teach you how to practice more self-control
Yeah.
and moderation in general.
You know, I thought about it the other day. I've been focused, I'm diligent about my diet, and I've been hammering really consistently on the X3 bar, and my physique is really shifting. I'm really happy with the way that my body looks. Maybe for the first time ever. Like I was sort of a fat kid growing up, and then I played college soccer, and I was still sort of skinny fat when I was playing college soccer. And now my body is shifting into the physique that I want. And my kids made cookies like 3 days ago. My wife and my kids hung out and made cookies together, and they were so excited to share their cookies with me. Like, we made these chocolate chip cookies, Daddy, have one. And then for a moment there, I was like, no, there's no effing way I'm gonna eat a chocolate chip cookie right now. I've been so good. But then I thought about it. I'm like, you know what? It is gonna taste amazing. It's important for my kids to like share the product that they
Right.
helped create. Now, it probably would have been better if my wife would have made like keto cookies or something,
Yeah, yeah.
but those aren't as good. So what I think about, and what I know is a big deal for people, is to not beat yourself up about it. Because if you're going to have a cookie or two, in my case, if you're going to have a couple of cookies and you've otherwise been really diligent about your diet, have the cookie, but don't freak out about it. Don't psych yourself out
Right.
about the fact that you're going to eat this cookie and it's going to destroy your world. Because if you do, and you get yourself into an elevated state, and you're like really stressed out, and your cortisol spikes and your adrenaline spikes because you're feeling really guilty and stressed about the fact that you're eating this cookie and all is lost. Oh God, you're crying while you're eating a cookie. Then it is going to be way worse for you than if you just like sit and enjoy and have the cookie and then go back to business as usual the next day. I think it's a big thing for people.
Yeah, definitely, and it's also yeah, just determined by your mindset and your
Right.
perspective on the thing. So like yeah, of course, it can be like a harmful thing for you if you if you overreact and if you do become stressed out. And certainly, like there are some rules I think some people should keep in mind when it comes to those things. So like generally, like you said, if it's a keto cookie or if it's like a whole foods based type of cookie, like those things are generally healthier than like the processed garbage that you get from the store. Like the actual staple junk food like McDonald's and those things, they're generally not healthy, and they're not going to be, even if like in moderation they can be sometimes okay. But I would say that even if you are having like a carb refeed, then you should still try to stick to whole foods as much as possible, and not do this sort of a hyper palatable combo, which is like the fats and carbs together, which is kind of the standard American diet. You're just eating these hyper palatable foods with a high calorie content as well. That's the kind of biggest culprit, that you combine the carbs and fats that you get from like a donut, which is the kind of the perfect example. But you can make a healthy donut that is, let's say, lower in fat or lower in carbs, depending on the situation, and you can still get like this enjoyable taste experience, but it's not going to be as damaging for you as like a conventional donut. So yeah, some key points can be still kept in mind. So whenever I am having my carb days, I make sure that the fat content on those days would be lower, so that I wouldn't like the combination of carbs and fats is implicated in like insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes as well, because your body can only like burn one fuel at a given moment, and if you combine them together, then they kind of tend to compete with each other, and that causes like metabolic dysregulation, which is called in physiology is called the Randall cycle. So that's essentially like the kind of one of the biggest rules that I tend to stick to, is to, if I'm eating a particular food group, then I'm not going to combine them together. I'm not going to combine fats and carbs. I'll have either a low carb, high fat, or the opposite, low fat, high carb. And generally the protein is always relatively high, because it's just great for body composition, satiety, and just feeling a fullness. So that's what I do.
Yeah. I've never heard it referred. I know that high carb and high fat is about the worst thing that you can do for yourself, and combine that with vegetable oils, and you're just like really just sitting there punching yourself in the face over and over. But I've never heard it referred to as the Randall effect. I want to talk a little bit about hormesis. I want to talk a little bit about thermogenesis. And I also want to get some previews on what the second book is about. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about. Well, you take it away. I know that you're working. I know that you're working really hard on book number 2. It would be really great to hear a little bit about where your focus is and why your focus is on this now.
Yeah, definitely. Like the kind of the current climate of the world, or the situation in the world, just made me think about these sort of things are always bound to happen. Like humans have always been evolving under different like environmental stressors, harsh conditions, and whatnot, and nutrition, stress, fasting, all those things. They're kind of a part of the human evolution. And in the modern world, we become somewhat soft, or we become under-adapted to a lot of those things that we take, or that we should be able to endure. Like, for example, fasting is a great example of it, being able to burn our fat. That's an example. And other examples would be just changes in temperature. Like, we should be able to endure like cold and heat and humidity and those things. But we don't really. We're in this very constant state of or this constant equilibrium. We don't experience the ups and downs. We're always in this very stable state. Like the central heating is always on. We always have access to food. We always have like very predictable schedules. Those things, we don't have the variability. But the problem is that we that just kind of makes us lose our ability to adapt. And the ability to adapt is just one of the kind of critical parts to the survival of any species, as well as like the evolution of any species. Like the world itself isn't gonna care about you having a cozy bed, or you having a stable salary, or you having access to a fridge or something. It doesn't really care. And the only thing you can do against it is the kind of control the things that you can control, which is your own thoughts and actions. And that kind of made me want to do this sort of a guidebook or a handbook or a manual for just general the stress adaptation as a phenomenon. And you mentioned it already, that stress adaptation can be called like hormesis, or this sort of a like a biphasic dose response to a particular stressor or a toxin that initially causes like some damage to the body and injury, but afterwards the body's going to adapt to it and get stronger. So exercise is just like the prime example of hormesis. You're doing, let's say, doing the workout, you're breaking down your muscle fibers, you're causing damage, but after you eat, after you sleep, after they recover, those muscles get stronger, and you are at like a higher ceiling afterwards. At least that's how it's supposed to work. And other examples of hormesis again are like fasting, ketosis, taking a sauna, cold exposure, ice baths, cold showers, and even like hypoxia, and and other, let's say, less conventional forms of hormesis are like plant compounds that you get from different herbs and spices, as well as like EMF, radiation, and those sort of things. So they all have like some sort of a hormetic effect on the body that can increase the body's overall like resilience against that particular stressor, as well as the general stress adaptation to any kind of stressor. So some of them overlap, some of them don't. Some of them are more like realm or localized, but they do tend to have like a generalized aspect to it as well.
Interesting. The takeaway for me is we have to be able to be stressed and bounce back, and that was actually what builds resiliency physically. It's what builds resiliency mentally too. How do you adapt to change? Right now we are all under stress. We are all reacting to this response globally, and it's unavoidable, and you cannot avoid the sort of global ramifications, because now there are economic factors. So even if you don't watch the news, you're exposed to the result of this pandemic response. You can tell how I feel about it. But as you describe it, these sorts of stressors that can come in the form of EMFs or workouts or fasting are all part of exercising that part of our physiology and our mental capacity to actually build up resilience and be stronger. So you're creating sort of like a guidebook, you say.
Yeah, like it's just going to include all of these different fields of stress adaptation. Like I cover fasting, I cover hot and cold exercise, and EMFs, and also like from the mental side, I cover like stoicism in particular, because I think that's like a prime example of like a sort of a mindset that is like able to endure stress as well as bounce back from it faster, in a way that you're not really affected by these ups and downs. You're kind of expecting them to happen, and at the same time you're also not affected by those things in a negative way. And it's like a mental stress adaptation, because a lot of these things tend to be purely psychological, and having like this sort of a stronger psychological resilience is generally very like associated with also like just longevity and well-being. So people who are more stressed out, whatever the case may be, or the cause, like maybe they're stressed out because of work or anxiety or depression or whatever it is, it tends to also be like a very bad for your health. Like too much stress is associated with cardiovascular disease, arthritis, sleeping problems, insomnia, depression, and just the overall mortality. So it's like not really something that you want to be in all the time. And and it's also very subjective. Like what is stressful for someone? Like I can endure quite a lot of work stress. I can endure quite a lot of fasting and exercise. But if I were to put those same stressors in the same amounts to like someone else, I don't know, like my grandmother or someone, then they're not going to be able to endure it as well. And they're going to have like much more negative consequences. So because their body, first of all, isn't that adapted to it. And secondly, like the stressor is just overbearing for their system. But you can condition yourself to endure it in larger amounts. You can condition yourself to endure higher amounts of stress with fewer negative side effects. And a good example of that would be, let's say, a lot of people think that ketosis is stressful for you because your body needs glucose, or your brain especially needs to run on glucose, which is true to a certain extent, that your brain does need a certain amount of glucose every day, but it can cover the majority of that demand with ketones, as well as even like fat and other substrates. So like alternatives to glucose are fatty acids themselves, as well as lactate that can be converted into glucose by gluconeogenesis, which the brain can then use. So if a person hasn't conditioned their body to run on fat, then for them it may be difficult, and then they may experience like hyperglycemia, they may experience lethargy, and they may even like pass out because their brain is running low on sugar. But if someone, if a keto adapted person, or someone who is eating a keto diet, then for them, then the kind of the threshold for those negative symptoms is much higher. So your blood sugar can drop a lot lower on keto before it starts to manifest with negative signs. Like you're not going to feel lethargic, or you're not going to faint, even if your blood sugar is like at 50 milligrams per deciliter, because your brain is using the ketones as well as the fat that it gets from its own body fat. Whereas someone who is, let's say, eating the standard diet, then they may even like start to feel dizzy at a blood sugar level of like 70 milligrams per deciliter. So the ceiling for them is much lower because their body is only able to burn sugar. And whenever they do run out of that sugar, then it becomes a stressor, and it causes damage to the brain, especially, as well as the general body, and they're going to react negatively. But if you are keto adapted, then your kind of stress adaptation is much higher, and you can endure much larger quantities of like glucose deprivation before you start showing negative symptoms.
Yeah. Well said, man. The clarity at which you speak, Siim, it's so nice, man. I think I'm not alone in saying I could just sit and listen to you talk about this stuff all day, which is why it's so important for me to bring you back. I want to get your take on a couple of different things. Where do you stand, or have you experienced or experimented with the carnivore diet?
Well, I do think I'm actually I do like the carnivore diet, so to say that it's a very simple diet, and it can be very convenient for a lot of people. And it does promote like keto adaptation. You are achieving a lot of the benefits of the keto diet. Like you have stable energy, you have stable blood sugar, and you have like fat adaptation. You can basically you can also fast for several days without feeling hungry, and you don't crash at all, basically, because you're very fat adapted. And in a way, a carnivore diet can also be, you can also achieve this metabolic flexibility with a solely carnivore diet, in terms of the metabolic flexibility between glucose and ketones. Like if you are eating like a higher protein carnivore diet, then some of that protein will inevitably be converted into glucose, and you can still refill glycogen, and you can still burn sugar as well as fat. So in a way, the carnivore diet is like a dual fuel type of diet, similar to the ones that we talked earlier. So that's a really good maybe, and it's also like, let's say, more suitable for people who have blood sugar issues, like a diabetic or insulin resistant person, versus compared to like a diabetic, they may not be able to have like any carbs at all, because they're gonna just experience these negative side effects. But on a carnivore diet, you have this dual fuel, and it's generally like, at least what I've heard from people, they can do it for like years without really kind of thinking about quitting. I've done it like for a few days, up to like week in some instances, but I haven't done it like longer than that, because I think that like I don't need to do it. Like I don't have any autoimmune conditions, I don't have insulin resistance, I don't have like carb addiction, or I don't have something else that kind of forces me to be on a very strict diet. I can get, let's say, I can get all the results from the carnivore diet by doing this sort of a metabolic flexibility diet, or doing even like a keto diet. So I don't need to do it. With it being said, the only shortcoming of the carnivore diet may be metabolic flexibility in terms of being able to tolerate different food groups. So especially in the context of this xenohormesis, which means that your plants contain these slightly toxic compounds, and they do have like a slight stressful effect on the body. And let's say if you haven't if you've been on a carnivore diet all the time for years, then your body may lose its ability to tolerate those compounds. And again, maybe pushes yourself into this corner where you have to kind of get out of more carefully. So again, like if a person is willing to do that, then I don't think they're harming themselves in any way. But at the same time, if they would ever want to eat, again, like some plants or some other hormetic compounds, then it's going to be like an issue in a way. Like, again, they may lose the ability to tolerate those compounds in small amounts. So a lot of the times when people say that broccoli destroyed their life or it gave them like stomach aches or something, then it usually happens like either they overconsume those things in very large amounts, or they ate them in raw, or the third thing is that they actually do have like some autoimmune issues and they're allergic to a particular food or something else. But let's say 80% of the people don't have those issues, and maybe like 20%, or like I look at it like in a bell curve scenario, that on both ends of the spectrum you have the vegan diet and the carnivore diet, and they maybe cover 10% of the population, but the rest of the population is gonna do best on a mixed diet, so to say, that they don't need to be on a strict restrictive diet, and they may not want to do it either. And there isn't I think they're not gonna miss out on it either if they do achieve like a balanced diet in a way that they combine both food groups. But yeah, generally like the carnivore diet is great if it works for you and if you need to do it, so to say. Like, I think it's going to be probably the best diet for treating any kind of autoimmune conditions. But at the same time, I think you should be wary of, if you don't have any autoimmune conditions, you don't have any allergies or something, then you may potentially give yourself those allergies if you go on a very restricted diet, because your body loses the ability to metabolize different types of compounds. Like for example, gluten intolerance. Some people react negatively to gluten, but if you avoid gluten all the time, then you're gonna react even worse afterwards. So to say, your body loses its ability to tolerate gluten because you're avoiding it all the time. So that's why microdosing some gluten every once in a while is like a good strategy for just maintaining this robustness and flexibility. So yeah, like I myself wouldn't be on a strict carnivore diet just because I don't want to develop any autoimmunity towards plant compounds, because I don't need to do it, and I think it's gonna be pushing yourself into this sort of a corner.
Yeah. Have you ever said microdosing glucose before?
Yeah, microdosing gluten.
Gluten. That's right.
Yeah.
Have you said that before? Have you used that term, microdosing gluten?
Yeah, I've used it quite often. Yeah.
I never have thought of that, honestly. But you're right. If you don't want to be totally wrecked because there was something in the food that you ate, or you were careless one day and you had some and it just destroys your gut and sends you out of whack and makes you crazy, then that's really interesting.
Yeah. And the problem is also that if you do wreck your gut because of having this gluten accidentally, then you think it's the gluten. Then you start blaming the gluten and saying, "Oh, there you have it. Those grains are so harmful for you because I react every time. Every time I have them, I react." Well, if you were to have them more often, maybe then you wouldn't react negatively because your body would be able to tolerate it. So again, the same with carbs. I can't eat carbs because I'll experience all these negative symptoms. I'll crash and I'll gain water weight and I'll just get a massive amount of cravings. It's a super compensation effect. If you pull the string on one end too hard, then the other end is gonna have to give in eventually. So it's a constant balancing act. And if you avoid a particular food all the time, then your body does down-regulate its ability to tolerate it. Versus if you were to have it in the diet at least every once in a while in some shape or form, then it's not going to be an issue. I usually have maybe some grains once a month or something. I'll have maybe a slice of bread, but it's like sourdough bread and those sort of things. And I'll maybe have like on like these special occasions, like it's a Christmas party or a birthday, then I'll have like some regular cake or something like that. And I'm not gonna react. I'm not gonna break out. I'm not gonna get bloated. I'm not gonna get fatigued the next day because yeah, I'm just burning it for energy, and I'm not experiencing any of these negative side effects.
Awesome. Oh man, I love that. I really do. I think that gives people hope to understand that they can and should be reasonable and introduce things that will, to keep them balanced so
Yeah,
that you can keep that flexibility.
yeah,
That's
and a lot of it also like transgenerational. So although let's say a person says I am willing to be on a very restrictive low carb keto or carnivore diet, that may have like some unpredictable consequences on, let's say, for your offspring. So if you a lot of your autoimmunity is determined by the mother. So and what kind of foods do they eat? So if you are on a very low allergenic diet, like you've never eaten or you never eat, I don't know, peanuts or fish or eggs or gluten for that matter, then that's also going to have an effect on your child's ability to tolerate those things. So that's why like lactose intolerance and those things also manifest.
right.
People tend to like they don't develop the right enzymes and digestive processes for those nutrients, and that can be all avoided, and that doesn't have to be that way. So although you may want to be on a low carb keto diet for the rest of life, maybe your child doesn't, or maybe the
Yeah.
world changes. Maybe the world changes, drastically in 10 years, that we need to be on this like slop diet or whatever it is, that we don't have access to like quality nutrition. Of course, I don't want it to happen, but
Yeah.
you never knows. Like in an apocalypse scenario, maybe you are forced to eat these packages,
Oh, yeah.
military packages with processed foods and such. So you
Yeah.
never know. And
Oh
again, like
man.
you have to kind of think of it, like almost like in a survival scenario,
Yeah.
because the world doesn't really care that you want to be on this pristine diet, clean, like an orthorexic diet. The world doesn't care, and only evolution is going to, the species that is going to survive is the one that is most adaptable and most
Yeah.
adaptable to different changes.
Brilliant. Oh, well said. Yeah, I really like that. I really like that. Well, you're thinking about your unborn children already, Siim. That's it's very progressive of you. Before I ask the last question, where can people learn more about you, follow along, and get in touch?
Yeah, well, my social media handles are all Siim Land, Siim Land, and yeah, my YouTube is also Siim Land.
That's pretty straightforward. Um, your content is phenomenal. I really, really appreciate the time. You probably remember this from your first appearance on episode 191. But if you would, please fill in the blank and take as much time as you'd like to complete the blank. Everyone would benefit from knowing
That stress isn't bad in the right amount. So that you would always, the kind of stigma is about stress is that it's harmful, and it's super that you want to avoid it all the time. Well, I think that it's stress can be good for you and useful if you know how to take it in the right dose, as well as how to recover from it better.
phenomenal, phenomenal. Well, you didn't let me down, Siim. I knew that you were gonna bring the heat, really useful information that people can use, and I'm really grateful. Thanks for coming back, and now that the Optimal Performance Podcast is mine, all mine, and I can do whatever I want with it, I wanted to make sure to have you back quickly. So, thank you so much for joining me today on the Optimal Performance Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and it was great talking.
And scene. That was great.